Welcome. Thanks for showing up today on a rainy, cold Oahu day. And I understand traffic's a little bad coming in from the east side of Oahu, and from the windward side. We can talk a little bit about that with you. Let me go ahead and read my script, but just some housekeeping notes. Make sure your phone is on vibrate or even better on silent. And I know that in the past we've had troubles with the microphones being heard, the speakers being heard well enough. Please let us know. We're both recording this, but we're also on the PA system. And if you can't hear us, just tell us that you can't hear us. I'm assuming you can hear me fine. Yes, okay. Chad Blair, welcome to Civil Beat's second Civil Cafe of 2019. I'm the Politics and Opinions editor, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Our panel will address major issues that have come up this year, ones that have not, maybe ones that should have. Before I introduce our panel, let me just tell you a couple things. This 90-minute discussion will be recorded and posted on Civil Beat's social media accounts and on civilbeat.org. It is not live. This is our second series of Civil Cafes at the Legislature. We will have a wrap-up, a POW session the week after things are over, come May 2nd. And a reminder to be polite to everybody here. And also about the questions. I see a lot of familiar faces. You know how we do this. If you have questions, you actually have to fill them out on an index card. And you'll see people like Alana wearing a Civil Beat shirt that can come around and help you fill those out. They're going to then Slack them to me. That way I'm going to read right from the computer. That's how we do it. We don't let people stand up and read their questions. Sorry. But that helps us kind of just concentrate the whole system. Any questions before we start? Hi, Bart. Speaking of Bart, last time I tried to recognize people that were in the audience, and I totally blew it. I called Capson Jesse Suki. That was a mistake. Sitting next to Jesse's wife, Janine Suki, at the time. I called some people who weren't actually in the audience. I missed others that were. So I'm not even going to bother to say, who's here, except to say thank you for being here. Many of you are very familiar faces, a very Akamai crowd. I just don't want to blow it last time. I felt terrible and still blushing. Except for Bart Dame. Bart Dame, who is his own. In fact, next time we got to have you up on here.
Exactly. That'd be fun.
Let me introduce our panelist. To my left is Senator Lorraine Inouye. She is chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, and of course she represents Hilo, pretty much.
Hawaii Island North.
Hawaii Island North, better way to put it. I guess Keali'i is more Hilo, yeah?
The largest district in the state.
Well, good, Chad. Very good. A round of applause for the largest district in the state. Representative Chris Lee is to my right. He is chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and I want to say Kailua. Does that sound right?
Also the largest district actually in the country, if you count Midway, which my district goes all the way to.
Good job. Good job.
Thank you, Rep. Lee. To my far right, next to Chris, is Keali'i Lopez. She is chair of the Democratic Party of Hawaii. Hello, Keali'i.
Hello, everyone.
And to Lorraine's left is Blake Oshiro. He is the executive vice president of Capital Consultants, and if anybody has been following this building over the last 10 or 15 years, a former vice speaker, was that, or majority leader at the legislature in the House for a long time. And a round of applause for our panelists today. So the way this works is I will have each of our panelists present what's on their mind at the legislature this session, the kind of bills and issues that they've been tracking. I'll follow up with a few questions, and then I will then turn it over to you to turn in your questions. I have a list as well, and the question should be for everybody. It's don't gang up on anyone in particular. I'd like to share the ohana here, and because it's a very informed crowd, and I would like to make sure that one person doesn't dominate all the questions. We've been pretty good about doing that, but I want to make sure. And by the way, panelists, if you want to add something, or feel free, just let me know. It's a very free-flowing talk story here. Okay, without further ado, we're going to start with Senator Inouye, who I'm going to call Lorraine because I've known her for a long time. She may not remember, but the first time we met, you were mayor of Hawaii County, and it was on top of Mauna Kea. July 11th, 1991. Do you remember what that was?
September 11th,
July or September?
September.
Is that what it was?
It's
the solar eclipse?
The solar eclipse.
That's right.
Correct.
Yeah. I was just 5 years old at the time. No, it was an amazing experience.
And he was much slimmer.
Ooh! Nailed it. We'll take that out of the final cut, of course, right, Ku? Senator, I know this bill has been very important to you. It's something that has come up the last couple of sessions and is not passed, and it's the Airport Corporation Bill. Tell me about why it's so important for Hawaii to transfer responsibilities of all the state's airports to a private corporation rather than having it run by the Department of Transportation.
Well, let me share that Hawaii is one of 3 states that are still governed by government operations, the airports. We have 15 airports in our state. We'd like to also have a nice airport. We'd like to have improvements made on a timely basis. We'd like to see many of our travelers enjoy the airports. However, you have seen we've been experiencing some modernization presently, but interesting, and let me share this with you, how fast government moves. When I was chair of the Transportation Committee during the Lingles administration in 2005, I left in 2008, so I was there for 10 years. And we approved a $2 billion modernization plan as well as the Harbor Master Plan. Okay, got it? I leave in 2008 because I ran for mayor. However, I wasn't successful, so I was gone for 6 years. My constituents wanted me back, so I ran in 2014, and I've been back in 2015. Guess who were the first groups, advocates that wanted immediately to see me when I came to this building? All the airport users and the members of the airport committee saying, Senator, we hope that you'll be able to get the Transportation Committee back again. Let me share with you that nothing was done from that period of time, then hence the Abercrombie administration for years, then the Inouye administration came on board the same year as I did. So I listened, heard their complaints. They've already floated the bonds, have been paying for it, and nothing was done. So henceforth, there we go. How many years is that? San Francisco, Los Angeles, all completed their modernization plans within 3 years. Isn't it a shame? So having said that, going back, I'm glad that the Inouye administration got on board, Ford Fujikami, and our DOT moved along and started what you see today. However, that's why we need government out of the operations of our airports. Having said that.
What killed the Airport Corporation Bill these last 2 sessions?
I think the House member is next to you. The bill did go to the Senate, much discussion during conference, and the last day, as you know, our speaker had removed all the conference committees, so.
Okay, it died in conference committee in the last days. Chris, I don't know if I'm going to put that onus on you to respond to what happened to the Airport Corporation. Let me ask you this. I don't know if it's bocce, but I noticed the Senate bill is 666.
Right. I was hoping it would be. I was hoping it would have been 777 or something.
Very appropriately.
But that's a good sign.
One or two other questions about the Airport Corporation, as well as your home district, your home island. What do you think a visitor typically thinks when they arrive, in particular at Honolulu International Airport? What is it you think the impression that they're taking away? Because it is the first place they see and the last place they see, unless they depart from one of the neighbor islands.
Well, first off, I think we have to look at the immigration arrival section, which is the worst.
Right.
I understand it. Having said that, I think we all experience, we want, whenever we arrive anywhere in the world, that we'd like to see a nice airport. We'd like to go to a nice restaurant. We'd like to go to a restaurant that has the kind of foods that we enjoy with nice seatings and maybe no birds flying around or something like that. However, yeah, the experience of a visitor is so important because this is the first point of contact with our island home.
Okay. 2 more questions for you. You're a neighbor island representative. What's that like going back and forth? I've always wondered how difficult that is to be flying in and out to find a place to stay. You, of course, get a stipend or an allowance from the state for that, but that must be pretty taxing to be away most of the part of the year anyway.
I can say for myself, I can say that I have a very patient and loving husband and no children. And so that's so important because your time away is what you dedicate yourself for the people you represent and the people of the state, because we're representative of everybody in the state, because we deal with bills. We're making lives better or worse for all of us. So having said that, it's pretty difficult for a neighbor islander because let me share with you my experience looking for accommodations. And just to say that here, your minimum rental agreements pretty much are 6 months. We're in session 4 months. We have a stipend for housing for 4 months. And so you know that whatever expenses is all on your own. Having said that, that's why perhaps some members in the legislature continue to have another job. And so just to share with you the burden financially. However, so having said that, you move every year because it's not a permanent place. You can't have your favorite furniture, your favorite bed. You take home all your stuff when you leave after 4 months. And so that's a life that a legislator from neighbor islands as well. However, after 5 months, I was kind of tired, and I knew that I'm dedicated probably to my history of being in political life. I was a council person, I was mayor, now I'm senator. So then I said, I think I'm going to be dedicating my life to the people of my island as well and the people of the state. So maybe I'll be in for a little while. So happens the stock market crash, right? You remember 2003, 2005? I lost some big bucks and I can't handle it. I grew up in a sugar plantation. I worked hard, saved as much as I could, and poof, several thousands of dollars went. And I looked at it, told my husband, you know what? I can't handle this. I'm going to take whatever little I have. I'm going to buy a condo, an apartment on Oahu. And I did. Good thing, prices were low. I may do well when I sell. However, the best thing I did. So I paid my taxes here, and I bought a car here. I have a rental my own condo living space in Salt Lake, and the best thing I did.
I appreciate you sharing that. That's something that I don't think most people are aware of, that lawmakers from the neighbor islands go through.
However, I'd like to add, though, so I'm gone, right, in 2008. I own the apartment. I own the condo. So I had it rented.
Very good.
And I rented to people living here. So I didn't do a vacation rental or anything. So it paid for my mortgage.
Very well done. I was going to ask you about roads in Puna, but I'll save that for a little bit later. I was there over the weekend. But I do want to get to Chris Lee. We just had a press conference, the House leadership, you, Speaker Sankey, Chair Luke. And tell us a little bit about what the purpose of that press conference was. What was the big news that came out of there?
Yeah, this was, half an hour ago?
Yeah.
So we just had a press conference today, I think, highlighting some of the work that we've been doing with our partners and from the community and our constituents who've weighed in on some big issues this year. And it really centered around one set of issues. And that's how we deal with elections, campaign finance, conflicts of interest, and ethics in government and in politics. And I think especially today, where across the country, you're seeing questions being raised about public transparency and whether or not people are being unduly influenced and all these things out of Washington, D.C. We want to make sure that here in Hawaii, we do our part to ensure that in the future, these questions are answered and that the folks who represent us here at the legislature, in the executive branch, at the counties, are making decisions based upon the interests of all of us and not just themselves or anyone else. And I think that's something that I think we've long worked at as the state, as counties, as institutions of government. But public perception rests upon a lot of different things, and the media that we hear from national interests is definitely a little bit rough these days. So we want to make sure that we really raise the bar in Hawaii. And so we passed about a dozen, maybe 15 bills this year that really tries to do justice to, I think, some of these questions being raised about where our government's going in general. And so we really broke it down, and we took a big stab at things. And I think this year, it's safe to say the House, and I think a speaker said it best, we're proud to have done this, to have moved out bills that do more, I think, to reform elections and campaign spending and trust in government than we've seen perhaps in a generation. And that includes things like, and these bills are now alive and kicking and moving over to the Senate. And there are some Senate bills which also are coming to the House on this. So it is a joint effort to move toward all-male elections statewide, not in 2026 or 2022 even, but this coming election.
By 2020, have that statewide.
It's possible we've already, I think it's likely we've already seen the very last election where we all walk in to vote.
Wow. Now, you can still walk in to vote, right?
Yes.
There would still be some places, some polling
Yes.
stations open for those who still enjoy that tradition of going into the voting
And what's
place.
really exciting about this is, that's right, you can still go in like you can go into City Hall before an election today and vote. In this case, you can also go in and drop off your absentee ballot if you choose to fill it out, if it comes to your house. But the biggest thing is we know from other states' experiences that you can really engage people in a new way and expand the voter base by giving them an easier opportunity to vote. And that's what this is all about. As well, at the same time, make sure that we answer questions over when ballots arrive and some of the questions that have been raised in recent court cases.
You mean like after 6 p.m. at the airport?
Perhaps. So that's one big thing. We're also moving forward legislation that requires mandatory automatic recounts if there's a really slim margin in elections. We're looking at also how do you engage newer voters and expand the pool of people who are voting here in Hawaii in a meaningful way. And so we've passed 2 bills that automatically pre-registers high school students to vote. I believe we'd be the first place in the country that does something like that. And then secondly, that mirrors what other states are doing. And I think Senator Inouye has been working on something like this in the Senate as well, which makes the DMV a gateway to registration to vote.
Is this automatic voter registration that we're talking about, or does that apply to other legislation?
Yeah, it is. It is that.
It is,
I mean,
okay.
there's different flavors of it and how to do it. The other stuff that we had passed, just to highlight very briefly, when it comes to campaign finance reform, and we've long known that on the Big Island especially, there were some really good pilot projects over the years that had looked at publicly financed elections and taking money out of politics in a meaningful way and giving people an opportunity to wage a debate in an election based on the merits, not just on how much money you're able to raise. And so I think we're moving forward on a bill that would implement that statewide. We're also, and let me go through my excellent list to highlight the most amazing, awesome stuff. We're looking at significantly increasing fines for campaign finance violations, especially for outside super PACs and those types coming in, because we know the influence that we're seeing in national races is creeping into Hawaii. So we want to make sure that people play by our rules here and don't go around them. The other things that we're doing are closing loopholes so that where you have campaign finance reports required in some months, in other months, you don't. So we want to close those voids so that it's clear that money is moving around wherever it's moving around, and people can see that transparently. I think it's something that everybody's agreeing upon. And then finally, when we get into addressing conflicts of interest, we also moved bills that, starting with the legislature, with ourselves, saying, you know what, we want to hold ourselves to a higher standard, says that we want to make sure that constituents and our responsibility to make decisions based upon what's in the best interest of the people, and hearing that is first and foremost, rather than just relying upon words of advice or suggestions from colleagues that we may know or others. So this says that if you're a legislator now, and 2 years from now, you decide to get out of politics, then you have to take a break for those 2 years before you can come back and lobby your own
Blake, did you have to
colleagues.
take a break for 2 years before you came back and lobbied your own colleagues?
No, actually, because I worked at the governor's office for 3
Before in the
years.
interim, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And there's an exception under the lobbying law when you're doing it on behalf of a state agency or county agency.
Okay.
You're not technically allowed.
Thank you.
Yeah. But
Are you planning ahead?
no, if I'm leaving this building, I'm going to go be on a beach with a Mai Tai somewhere. But
Chris, these all sound like common sense reforms.
Yeah.
It looks like the House is behind it, hopefully the Senate. Why did it take so long to get to this point?
you know, I don't think it's taken so long. I think, frankly, in Hawaii, we do have a fairly good system that is, compared to other states, incredibly transparent. And in spite of, I think, some of the frustrations that we've seen from some of our constituents trying to get access to information and that sort of thing, compared to other states, we're pretty good. But for us, I think it's a question of, all right, what more can we do to raise the bar? And what loopholes can we close to make sure that we're covered? And so that's what this is all about. There's a whole list of these things that are going over to the Senate. And I think this is my moment to get on my soapbox and say, these things will only pass if everyone out here in the public decides that they're worth passing. And so as these bills come up for hearings and as the process unfolds on this or anything else, airport corporations or what have you, be sure to weigh in. You know, this is your opportunity, these few months. What you guys decide you want to invest in will happen, whether it's this year or next. But one thing's for damn sure, and that's that it won't happen without you.
Chris, let me ask you, where are we with the decriminalization bill for marijuana? It was amended for amendment yesterday. I think
Yes.
it's awaiting a vote tomorrow. And by the way, one of our first questions is, when will we have recreational cannabis? Do we need to tax that? We'll get to that in a moment. Maybe I'll have Keali'i answer that question. But let's start with the decriminalization bill. What does that do? Is it going to pass out of your chamber? And you're not so sure in your chamber. Go ahead, Chris.
Sure. So
comment
we've had a number
I'll comment later.
of
Okay.
drafts of bills, but the bill that we just voted to amend yesterday in the House will decriminalize. So to be clear, not legalize, but decriminalize possession of marijuana up to 3 grams, which is roughly 5 or 6 joints.
How do you?
I don't know what a joint is.
how do
I've
you
never
know
actually
that?
Seen one, but I'm told.
Okay. And by decriminalization, that means you can have up to 3 grams and not be
No.
penalized?
So what that means is, instead of going to jail, instead of being charged with a criminal
I
penalty,
see.
which is on your record permanently and forever, which could bar you from access to loans or educational opportunities or certainly jobs in some cases, instead this says you'll be charged with a fine. So it remains illegal. There is still a legal deterrent, but it's a deterrent that works in today's context where we know that this stuff is always, for generations, been widely available, and we shouldn't be permanently penalizing people and damaging their future potential to participate in society as a result. Secondly, the important thing is that we know that a huge number of people in our jails and with criminal records are there as a result of substance abuse problems, in some cases being arrested for having a joint. And so in this case, we want to make sure that we are responsibly, as stakeholders of taxpayers' stewards of taxpayer dollars, doing our best to reduce substance abuse. And that means doing more with less, which means the $146 we spend a day to incarcerate someone for having a joint is better spent not incarcerating them, but instead actually going into treatment programs and to other things, to diversion and other alternatives that work.
Okay, just Lorraine, did you want to jump in at all? I don't want you to speak on behalf of your chamber, but a decrim bill seems to be heading over to your side as early as tomorrow.
Well, the decrim bill, you know, and it's great because it'll be debated in the Senate. However, and that's a good discussion, but I can't speak on behalf of the Senate regarding recreational marijuana, which will be very debatable in the Senate. As you know,
It's dead for now, is my
it's dead.
understanding.
yeah. So, and it won't come up in the
Okay.
Senate at all.
Okay.
So, so having said that, however, you know, even if a recreational marijuana bill would come over, we need to make sure that the process and everything is moving along with the medicinal marijuana.
That's
bill.
what Ross
And
Baker's position has been.
Right. And, you know, we're really not 100% comfortable that things are well, and so let that take place. That's most important.
Okay, Chris, just another question before we move on to our next guest. What's the deal with the poly? When's the poly going to be fixed? I know you must take that? You must be going like now.
It pains me to have to answer this question, Chad, because I spend hours in my car now driving around.
It's going to be months, isn't it?
It's going to be many months.
Wow.
And so we're told that DOT is looking at several options, which includes extending the tunnel so that if stuff falls down from above, there's protection there. But obviously, that's going to take money. So there's an emergency appropriation that the legislature's dealing with right now. And then eventually, hopefully 4 or 5 months maybe, fingers
Maybe
crossed,
more.
to actually
Maybe more.
implement.
Okay, sorry to hear that. Speaking of recreational marijuana, the Democratic Party had tiered priorities for this session, and the top tier, and correct me if I'm wrong, included recreational marijuana, not decriminalization, a minimum wage. You can tell me what the other ones. Graduate Student Union, was that lower tier?
Increased funding for public education.
And that's something that is moving ahead as well out of the Senate just yesterday. What's your reaction to what happened with the recreational bill, and would you be satisfied with decriminalization?
You know, I think any movement. So one, I have to say that I'm actually very happy to hear what Representative, whatever your name is, Chris Lee had to say, both with regards to their press conference. I think from the Democratic Party's perspective, anything that improves conflict of interest issues, engages more voters, the Democratic Party would definitely be supportive of that. As it relates to decriminalization, you know, I think that's a step forward. I'd rather see that happen than nothing. At this point, recreational marijuana was a priority for, you know, having that passed in this session. As you indicated, both bills from the Senate died. And at minimum, I think ensuring that our jails are not filled with people who have been involved in very minor drug-related offenses is important, and you know, fines is an alternative. And if those fines are going to be used for drug treatment programs, you know, I think that's great. Kat would probably be one of the best people to talk about the issues about prison reform and what that is. But you know, that's definitely one of our.
You know, I have to ask you, when the news came out, I think the local AP reporter had a story about recreational marijuana dies in one of the most liberal, perhaps the most liberal, the most blue state, and that's what made the headlines, right? Because AP gets picked up. Are we really that blue of a state, that liberal of a state, if a marijuana bill dies, even though you have all these other states moving forward with recreational marijuana?
We're extremely blue state. I mean, I would say we run along the gamut, though. You know, the Democratic Party is a large tent, as they say, and we have people who are very progressive and those who are conservative. And I think Senator Inouye spoke to that already. The issue that it's took 10 years for the legislature to pass medical marijuana. I think it's going to take hopefully less than that for recreational marijuana to occur. But you know, understandably, the legislature has ways that it has to look at how these issues are implemented. And having been, for good or bad, prior State Department head, I realize it does take a whole lot to implement. It's, believe it or not, it's as hard as it is to pass a law. It's much more difficult to implement it.
You ran DCCA.
Department of Commerce Consumer Affairs, absolutely.
Where are we with minimum wage?
So I'm happy to, so other than for our priorities, many of our priorities are still alive, and we appreciate that from both the House and the Senate. With regards to minimum wage, 2 of the House bills are still alive, and that's HB 96 and HB 1191, and then the Senate bill, SB 789. I think that's probably our top priority, although we, like I said, those other 2 bills were our priority. But increasing minimum wage for our workers is critical. I think when you have an issue like the Hawaii Business Magazine dedicating 3 of their issues to address the fact that there's such a disparity in income here in Hawaii and how the increase in minimum wage has not kept up with inflation, and it's outpaced it in a phenomenal way. And I think that's the question.
Okay.
If you want to talk about a blue state, that's the one that needs to be passed.
$15 an hour, or there's still some wanting $17 an hour by, I don't know, 2023. I'm not sure what the year is, but is I hear Kat saying $30 an hour. $15, does that seem to be the figure that we're probably moving towards?
I think that's what's out there now. I know that from our perspective, we have been pushing for 17. And, again, I think if you look at it, I think what folks don't realize is there are many, many workers out there who are only part-time and do not get health coverage. A big part of the issue has been, well, let's look at the fact that a lot of workers already get a really wonderful benefit, which is where you say Hawaii is blue. That's a good example of Hawaii being blue when we created the Prepaid Healthcare Act and made sure that full-time employees were provided health insurance through their employers. The challenge is many employers actively work to only have people work part-time. They keep them below the 19 hours a week. You don't have to provide health insurance, and they're getting paid basically poverty level pay. So the issue really for us as a group is to understand how increasing the minimum wage in the long run is going to benefit everyone. Statistically, it has been shown that it improves the economy overall. People have more money to spend and are able to take care of their families. So it's debatable, which is why this is struggling. And I recognize what the legislature is having to deal with. It's one thing for us to say we want it, and it's another thing for businesses to have to implement it.
The Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii, most organizations against it.
Absolutely, and I understand why they are. It doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, though. Okay, so no, seriously.
No.
Department of Commerce, Consumer Affairs. I've run businesses. I know what that is. The issue is what's the right thing to do. You have people who are barely able to put food on their families' tables. Hawaii is one of the best states with regards to some of those safeguards, and I'm referring to our Department of Human Services. Don't get me wrong, the legislature has provided, and the federal government has provided significant funding. Hawaii has a huge, huge population as relates to people who are on assisted benefits. But imagine if that were decreased significantly because we're increasing the minimum wage. It'd be interesting to take a look at that and recognize what a difference that's going to make. So from my perspective, it's just a matter of what's the right thing to do. I think Local 5, when they went on strike, had it right. One job should be enough. How does anyone imagine that one job is more than one job, having to live at home with your parents, and having to have multiple jobs to put food on your family's tables, and recognizing that the business community is important to Hawaii? Don't get me wrong. That's how everyone, I presume, in here is getting paid, right? But the truth of the matter is, until we see taking care of people as a priority, this is going to continue to be a problem, and it's going to be a difficult thing. We're often concerned about people leaving Hawaii and moving to the mainland. It's not just the cost of homes. It's how much you get paid to work here.
Okay. Thanks, Keali'i. Blake, to you, if you wouldn't mind moving your microphone even closer. Thank you so much.
So Capital Consultants is a long-time lobbying firm that's been around under the founders of Red Morris and John Radcliffe, both of whom are retired and transitioning out. So it's me, Bruce Copa, and Ross Yamasaki that are the lobbyists taking over the book of clients.
I see down as your clients Young Brothers, Kamehameha Schools, Charlie's Taxi, Monsanto. Is it? I never know how to pronounce this drug company. Is it Pfizer? Is that how it's pronounced? Yes. That's quite a lineup of interesting clients to represent. What's top of mind for you in terms of bills that are moving through this session?
So we have a mix of Fortune 500 clients, of Hawaii-based corporations and nonprofits. And so a lot of what we do is advocate on their behalf. I would say that there are some significant issues that we've dealt with in the past that are still continuing on. A couple of them that I would just speak off the top of my mind would be for vacation rentals. There's still a effort to try and see what kind of regulations on tax collections there could be at the state level. But we see that there's also a lot of action going on across the street at Honolulu City Council.
Your county as well, Airbnb, yes.
Yeah, so they passed a law recently. They're in the stage of having their rules. And so they have a system in place that's now getting implemented, and we'll see how that works out for Hawaii County. But Honolulu has been the one place that hasn't dealt with the issue since 1989. And so that's why there is such a dearth of illegal activity, because they've not done anything with their law for 30 years.
There are proposals before the council right now.
Correct.
Coming from the mayor, from others.
Correct. And so we'll see if something passes there, and then I think that will largely inform perhaps what goes on at the state level, because it's clear that there are a lot of these rentals out there, and the question is always, are the taxes being collected and remitted on their behalf? So that's sort of one of the big issues that we've been following. The second one that I've been following on behalf of the licensed dispensaries for medical cannabis has obviously been recreational and decrim, and so we're continuing to watch that. I think from the dispensaries' perspective, with the amount of finances that they've invested in terms of setting up their system in one of the most highly regulated industries, they're very cautious about how these issues will ultimately end up impacting them.
Are we now under the Department of Health, I guess, if you're a medical marijuana patient from the mainland, now that when you come here, you're allowed to fulfill your subscription here?
Yeah, so we worked closely with the Department of Health last session to pass a law that would recognize an out-of-state card holder that comes in so that they can get access to medical cannabis, because it is medicine, but unfortunately due to the federal regulations, they cannot transport their medicine from out of state into Hawaii. And so they've been continuing to work with the Department of Health. I think yesterday you saw a press release and press conference indicating a lot of changes going on with the program. So I think we're excited on that front.
What's the biggest difference for you, having been in this building for a long time and being on this side, and now you're on that side? What's that like?
So it's really funny, because actually I started out, before I got elected, I was coming to testify on behalf of Sierra Club, right? And so I was on the nonprofit side advocating for these environmental changes.
I forgot that you were with them.
Yeah, so that was like way before, like when I was just out of law school. And then I ran for office, and I did that for several years. Then I went to the governor's office, and then you're actually still kind of doing the same thing. You're coming here and you're begging for your bills and begging for money. And so it wasn't it was a real difficult transition for me then. Right, and then to switch from that to private is actually not that much of a difference. I'm just advocating for private entities rather than the governmental agencies.
What do you not miss being on this side of the table?
So the one thing I always tell people about why I probably would not run for office again is campaigning. I was like the worst campaigner. I actually knew how to do it. I was excellent at telling people exactly what to do, but I was horrible at doing it. And I had this reputation of being a bad campaigner.
I want to say Aiea, Pearl City?
Yes.
But you never lost an election.
No. I mean, I was very fortunate, knock on wood. I mean, one of them was like in 1% that I won. But there was a couple squeakers.
I want to ask a question here, open it up a little bit here. Lorraine and Chris, when you see someone like Blake, who you served with, come before you, or someone who's the chair of your own party, do you tend to open the door easier to those people and listen to them simply because you know them, you have a relationship with them? Does that give you already, I guess what I'm trying to say is, are they able to influence what you do by virtue of their past relationships with you?
You know, I think it's, my door is always open to anyone, first of all, but I think certainly and Blake's been a friend over the years, happy to talk about anything. But I actually think I hold him to a higher standard, because we know that Blake knows his stuff. So if you're going to come in and ask us to take a look at whatever the issue might be, then you really got to come guns blazing. Whereas I think from the community, you know, there's a lot of folks who don't have time to invest in the political process and all that, and do a lot of the research that others can. So I actually think I hold them to a higher threshold.
Lorraine?
Yes, I can respond to that, because I've known Blake for all the years he's been here and all the years I have been from the previous 10 years. And what's interesting, there is a difference between how lobbyist comes in and asks for something or tells you what to do, and you have the exchange going back and forth. However, I see it as a very positive exchange because he already knows what we can do, what we can't do, knows the laws as well, and it's much easier, you know, to discuss. But sometimes, you know, they're smarter than we are, and this is, but, you know, you can do it this way, and you can do it that way. But, you know, and for Blake himself, I can speak for himself, as is that he understands, and he knows where he has to cut off, or he will know already. And people who have been in my office as well will know that I'm pretty upfront with them. They'll either be able to get what they want, or I'll have reservations, but they'll know where I stand. And so I enjoy those that have been here before who would come in and work with us as well.
We're at the halfway point, by the way. I do have questions coming in. You can see Alana running around with the box and the yellow cards if you want to get. He and I were talking about the L word earlier today, lobbyist. And I couldn't help but ask, and Blake, you can chime in as well. Are lobbyists unfairly, how do I put it?
Yes.
Do you have a bad... There's a certain reputation that lobbyists have. I think Hillary Clinton, when she was running for president, said, look, lobbyists, a lot of them are good people. They're advocating for good issues, but it tends to be such a negative word. But you were a lobbyist. Well, you are a lobbyist now, essentially.
I'm a lobbyist now. I was a lobbyist when I was the chair of the Democratic Party. I was a lobbyist when I was the president and CEO of Olelo Community Television. The truth of the matter is, I definitely understand why people have that perspective. If you look at Washington, D.C. alone, and I think that's where a lot of people get this concern around when you have the NRA as an example, dumping in millions, if not more, into their efforts. You know, so folks get that perspective. But I think, like anything else, it's never good to paint everybody with the same broad brush. And from my perspective, in my work with lobbyists, in my work with legislators, I actually believe when I go in to meet with a legislator, I'm actually clear that a constituent is going to have more influence with a legislator than I am. And so that as a lobbyist, I have to come at it from a different perspective. And what I mean by that is, and this is just my perspective, I believe that legislators hear from lobbyists all the time, as wonderful as we are. The truth of the matter, though, is sometimes to break that situation where you're hearing from so many different voices, and especially if they're lobbyists. And lobbyists aren't bad. They're advocating for whoever their client is. Their reputation is based on being truthful and upfront and building a relationship with legislators. If you are involved in a situation where you're providing misinformation or steering a legislator down the wrong path, you're pretty much not going to have very many doors open to you.
Okay.
But I do think, I mean, so the loggerheads piece, I think they do. I go with what Rep. Lee said. They absolutely have to hear from constituents.
Okay. Blake, a tip for lobbyists, and there are many actually in this audience. Give us do not ever do this with a legislator if you're trying to get something passed.
Lose your credibility. I think your credibility is everything, and you cannot ever extend that and feel that it's something you can gain back. Once you lose it, then you'll probably never get it back with that legislator.
Okay. Thank you. To the Q&A, and we have a lot of questions, some that came in earlier, and this is for anybody, so it's going to be like, just raise your hand. Do you think the legislature will seriously consider making our tax system less regressive by moving away from the GET and perhaps increasing income tax on the wealthy, especially since the wealthy just got a federal tax cut?
I'll take a step.
Sure.
Okay. I'm not fond of tax increases, as we all, well, maybe you don't know, because yesterday we had a bill that would raise the GET tax for education. I was the lone I take it back. Senator Revere supported me in the Committee on Ways and Means, the Money Committee in the Senate, and I voted it down. Oh, and I prefaced myself as saying that Mayor Kim is already going to raise the GET tax on Hawaii Island this year as well. And so I can't continue to raise another tax for my constituents in the Big Island, so I voted no. However, I've always said when I've been here that I think that, and looking at other states, looking at the entire tax systems, I think we're better off with a sales tax. The GET tax is too regressive. And of course, in that, having said that, then when you look at a sales tax, then we'll gain more, however, but then how do we address our people, those that are, our seniors? We're looking at prescription drugs. Then at that point in time, you were able to allow that to happen. No tax on your foods for seniors or those.
But what about taxing the wealthy more?
Absolutely. And I think, I believe the city and county is already trying to do that with regards to real property, real estate. So having said that, I think if they want to come to paradise, then they can pay their fair share.
Ripley?
Yeah, I think I'd echo that the legislature has actually been taking action on some of these things, both deferring some proposals and also passing others. In the past few years, we've created the state's first EITC, which previously didn't exist, and that's something that helps.
Earned income tax credit.
Yes, helps those families who need the help the most. On top of that, we've got bills that we've already passed to increase taxes on the highest tax brackets, because those are the folks who typically are escaping paying their fair share. Even this year, there are bills moving right now which further changes that paradigm. And I think for us, one of the things is not completely ignoring the fact that tourists that come into the state are the ones that ought to also pay their fair share. And they're coming in to use our resources, our infrastructure, and so the question is, how can we ensure that our tax base, and whatever structure it takes, whether it's a GET or anything else, captures that outside demand to help reduce the burden on all of us that we
Okay, Keali'i public education funding is a priority. I'm assuming the Democratic Party, and if not, correct me, are in favor of the bill that Lorraine voted against yesterday, Senate Bill 1474. This is basically the HSTA's latest effort to get more money for the schools. Of course, Con-Am failed, rejected by the courts last year. Do you have a position on this?
Yeah, definitely. We are in support of, and it's SB 1474, and it's moving over into the House, and I would ask that people advocate for that bill to be passed. Now, if, again, the tax structure, how the legislature goes about finding those funds is probably not as much of an issue for the Democratic Party, so much as increasing the amount of funding for public education. Again, it just gets back to the fact that teachers are so poorly compensated. You heard, and we've seen in the news, the challenges with just the facilities. So there's obviously much more that needs to be done with regards to public education. We absolutely believe that teachers should be better compensated.
Question for Blake. Blake, if your bill doesn't get passed, do you still get paid?
Yes. So under the lobbying law, actually, your compensation cannot be tied to the outcome of legislation, pass or failure. You get paid based off of a rate, and that's what you get paid.
Okay, good enough. Question, given the context of the rail debacle, are we ready to take on another big public-private works project like the stadium? I am assuming this is the plans to have a stadium area, a new stadium, which of course is dilapidated. It should have been torn down years ago. They're suggesting we're looking at another rail debacle if we put in all this money into a No Aloha Stadium, which is moving forward, I think.
I would say that, for Oahu and our entire state, if you look at projects that's happening and what's not going to, if rail is completed, it's going to be completed. What's the next biggest labor project that we can employ our people looking for jobs? There's none. We've already built all of our court systems. So government buildings are not being built. We need a new stadium, and then it'll be providing jobs for our construction workers. So that's a good thing. And I'm very concerned that once those cranes get out of Kaka'ako and the buildings, our new high-rises that's going to happen, we won't have many projects in the state.
Blake, you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything the Senator said, but the other distinguishing factor to me is rail was, by most accounts, rushed into, right? It started out really because they just had to get going, right, to lock up everything in place. I mean, if there's anything about this stadium thing, it's been going on for years, and there ain't no rush going on, right? I mean, when I was a kid, I remember going to the stadium and seeing rust, and I was like, this thing is new. Why is there rust? And that was like 30, 40 years ago, right? I mean,
I thought it was
it's
supposed to rust.
I mean, but it is, right? That was what they said. No, it's protective rust.
Protective rust.
Yes.
The good rust.
Everybody knows, like, rust is rust, right? I mean, there's no protective rust.
But you say there's no urgency, but my understanding is there are some parts of the stadium that there's a worry that there could be a collapse or some injury.
We need the stadium.
Yeah, they just need to be doing it, because at this point, any money they're spending to try and rehabilitate it is just wasted money, right? Because it's going to keep falling apart.
Okay, stadium.
Yeah, I just want to broaden this just a little bit, because I think when we talk about $300 million for a stadium or billions of dollars for rail, we have to look at sort of the long term, which is we have right now a significant amount of money that we're going to have to start spending in the near future on our infrastructure that is not only falling apart and all of that, but also because of the impacts that we're about to start facing. Honolulu itself is expecting to see regular flooding of the urban core at high tide in as little as 15 years. The amount of money that we've already identified to fix that problem runs into the tens of billions of dollars. That doesn't even count the $19 billion of coastal roads and infrastructure that we're expecting to lose in that same time frame. So the question really is, how do we figure out how to pay for all of this over the long run? Because this dwarfs the amount of money that we're talking about today.
But I think your finance chair is against bailing out the Inouye, helping to protect that, says that's a city project. We shouldn't be devoting state money towards that.
I think there's a lot of questions surrounding that particular project, because it's federal money coming in. How do we match? Who's responsible for what? Is it the city? Is it the state? But in the long run, I think what we're all agreeing on in the legislature, at least in the conversations I've been a part of, is that we have to prepare for the future and stop thinking short term, but start thinking long term.
Okay, Lorraine, I was in Puna visiting family over the weekend and finally got down to Leilani Estates, saw Fissure 8, saw all the devastation that had happened. Right now you've got one road, really, 130 going in, and then 137 is cut off, although recently the county has graded to Isaac Hale.
And 132.
And then 132 as well. Any relief coming? I've heard several people say, why can't you start leveling parts of 132 to get people connected again?
Well, let me say that the state only manages Highway 130. 137 and 132 are county-owned roads. And so the debate is, how much are we going to be given to the counties? And the debate is ongoing. We already have passed our bill to support the county of Hawaii in Highway 132. I'm not sure how far it'll be, because they're also asking for a lot of money, $60 million for other issues as well. So, how much that Hawaii County will get from the state is a debatable issue. Now, having said that, on the highways, it's a very challenging one, because it's not a state project. And so the only thing that we could do is provide dollars, provide funding, and give it to the county to manage.
Okay.
And I would believe that's the farthest that the state can do, but you're correct, because the county has already done the moving along in making improvements to 137.
Right.
And so, having said that, that's a county's kuleana. Again, I go back to why Mayor Kim is looking at raising the tax. And one of the issues is that the language in the allowing the county to have the ability to raise taxes last year was that the county of Hawaii could have raised their tax by the 2 cents or 2%.
2.5.
But they 2.5. But they decided to chop that down to a quarter.
Okay.
And so, having said that, they need the money, so it's their kuleana. But I feel for them.
Parts of 130, by the way, there's actually steam coming up on the sides of 130. It's kind of surreal to go over a road that's smoking. But it's, anyway.
But you're still saying that's Pele's territory.
That is Pele's territory. A question for Keali'i. The grad student unionization, this bill comes up again and again and again, and it fails again and again. Ironically, in one of the most pro-labor, perhaps the most pro-labor state in the country. Why are you in support of the grad student unionization, which is still alive, is my understanding?
Yes, both vehicles are still alive. That's HB 919 and SB 1368. And I'm sorry, I give that out because I want people to take a look at those bills and definitely follow up on advocating those. So from our perspective, it gets back to the similar issue around fair compensation for the work. I think one of the challenges often for many of these graduate students is that they're putting in an inordinate amount of hours. I mean, the way that they do much of the research or classes that they teach and such are difficult hours. I think
I would say slave labor as a former grad student.
It's like the legislature.
I guess so, in a longer extended period of time, very similar. And so from our perspective, it's just a consistent part of what the Democratic Party supports. And absolutely, we'd like to see the grad students be able to create their own, form their own union.
Can I add
Sure.
just to that? I understand in hearing the debate the last couple of weeks is that on the Senate side, we've heard others saying, well, the grad students are not full-time. And so they're saying, well, are they allowed then to become a union member?
Yeah, they keep you at 19.5, but let me tell you, it really spills over. But it's been a while since I was a grad student. Blake, question for you about Airbnb.
Yes.
There's actually several, but let's see if I can narrow this down. Is there a way to regulate the amount of vacation rentals in a particular area or protect renters? For example, I was recently evicted and my landlord turned the entire property into divided Airbnb units.
Yeah, actually, the proposals that are moving through the Honolulu City Council, the mayor's proposal puts a cap on the number of units that can be rented out in a district, and it defines the districts. So there are ways that it can be done. Other jurisdictions have done it in terms of caps, or the other thing you can do, not only in terms of the number of units, is actually regulate the amount of nights that they can actually rent out during the year, so that it's not a 365 per day year all the time vacation unit. And so it forces the landlord to have some time where they have a long-term rental, right?
Got
if
it.
you have a 6-month cap versus 6 months of
Okay.
just free.
We're at the one area. Yeah,
Can I
we're-
add to it?
Oh, of course, Lorraine. Go ahead, please.
Only because this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart from my constituents on Hawaii Island. One thing that I dislike is that the mayors, including Oahu and Hawaii County, the measures that's before them only looks at lands and vacation rental homes within an apartment and tourist destination areas, visitors. They're not considering looking at addressing the issue in residential areas, and that's where for Hawaii Island, they've deleted the residential part. They haven't debated that issue, and that's where our problems on Hawaii Island is.
Thank you. We're at the 1 hour mark. We're going to go probably at least another 15 minutes or so. We'll see questions. This one, I guess, is on everybody's mind. Will the federal subpoenas for HART, 3 now, HART documents affect government funds promised to Hawaii or affect future decisions in Hawaii to complete mass transit? Lorraine, I guess that's transportation chair.
Yeah, I don't believe, and I feel comfortable that the feds are doing their due diligence, which they should. Interesting that we have, and we believe that the feds won't cut us off in the funding.
Okay. Boy, I wish I could get more to everybody, but Repley, this is for you. This is HB 1326, the water rights bill, and I believe this is the one that the Sierra Club and others are opposed to extend the water leases. Is that right, for Alexander and Baldwin and other companies?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. What's your position on the bill?
This is the bill that came up, I think, 3 years ago
Correct.
when the law was first changed. I actually,
And then they granted a 3-year extension, isn't that right? And now that's up.
Right,
and
right,
now they're
right,
calling for
right.
another 10 years?
I'm not sure what the Senate's
Okay.
up to, but on the House side, it's a 7-year.
7-year, okay.
It's a 7-year. Yeah, so that came on the floor for the first time that I saw it just a couple days ago. The last time, actually cut a deal sort of behind the scenes to stop an indefinite extension.
You did something behind the scenes in this
I know.
building?
Well, sometimes. But what that meant was I voted for the 3-year extension.
Okay.
And that was sort of the way that works. But this time around, I did support the bill because it didn't seem clear that the issues that DLNR and others were working with when it comes to leases and all that sort of thing had been actually worked out. So you don't want to leave people in a lurch. I understand the concerns about some of the issues which have been raised this whole time. And I certainly have questions over that I think we can address. But in the meantime, I didn't want to throw the whole baby out with the bathwater. And so that's rough because at the end of the day, it's not a perfect solution. But I think what people find in the legislature is there's a whole lot of gray. And you've got to find some way to operate therein.
Okay,
I
okay.
think the unintended consequences will occur because it's kind of like a misnomer that you would identify that bill as an AMV bill, because it's truly not, because the impact will affect what happens in other counties. Particularly, it'll be related to issues on Kauai, and it could be on the Big Island with regards to water services for our farmers and things. So there's going to be unintended consequences. So hopefully that a good, clean language will happen,
Okay.
that
But I
everybody
would
would
say
be
too,
satisfied.
if I can, I think this is one of the things this has been one of the few bills, actually. It seemed like a quiet year this year. This has been one of the few bills that has got a lot of attention. I really do appreciate, I think, our colleagues for making their voices heard on this, on both sides, especially those who've had the courage to stand up and say, this is a priority issue and I'm going to vote for or against or whatever it is, because otherwise, for folks like me, like I chair the Judiciary Committee, I've got 567 bills coming through my committee this year, and there's no way you're going to be able to go through the due diligence on everything else that's out there with any meaningful ability. So we rely on our colleagues, and I think that's why, for me, I really appreciate the debate on this one.
Blake, in all your years at the Ledge, what issue do you wish you could have gotten passed but didn't? That dream piece of legislation that maybe you even introduced or advocated for? Anything that you thought, gosh, never did get that one done?
Actually, no. Because I will say, had you asked me that before last year, I would have said medical aid in dying.
Huh. And of course, John Radcliffe was more or less the poster boy for that legislation.
Yeah, Death with Dignity, I started working on when I first got elected in 2001. On the 1998, after Governor Cayetano did his Blue Ribbon panel, we passed a bill in 2003, thought we almost got there, we didn't. And so since then, it's been one of those issues that kept coming back and never passed. And so now that that's kind of done, I'm kind of like, hey, check it off. And
some say the bill is the law now, which went into effect in January.
Correct.
Is too onerous, that there's too many steps to go through. Is there any chance that the legislature might revisit that to make it easier? We are talking about people that are facing the last part of their lives here and having to go through a number of hoops.
Yes. So the Act, when it was passed, requires that at the end of this year, Department of Health come back with a report to the legislature to sort of indicate where are the obstacles and where they might recommend changes. And so I do think that next session there will be some things to look at. I'm hoping that none of those will be too controversial so that there's not the political will to pass it. I will say that Mr. Radcliffe has gone through the process, and he's found that it has been extremely difficult to access the medication, that from the time he started the process till he actually got the medication, just so that he could walk through the process, not that he's taking it, right, just to be clear. He just wanted to be one of those that actually walked through the process and saw where all the obstacles was, because he had access to people to figure out how to break through those obstacles. For him, it took 2 months, and so for the average Joe, debilitated patient out there, it would obviously take them much longer. Okay. And that's the kind of thing we're hoping to look at next year.
Okay. Dream list, Keali'i, anything over the years as a lobbyist, something that you would like to have seen happen that never did?
Actually, my answer to that would be no. This legislative session, I would say that dream piece is well within hand, which is the increase in minimum wage.
There is a question about what about ending the sub-minimum wage, and I'm not sure what is a sub-minimum wage?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, there are different pieces of this, but basically, especially for folks who have a disability, you're able to employ people at less than minimum wage. So there's been a couple bills in recent years to try and close that off.
Okay, okay. What is your position on gut and replace? What are your bills was just gutted and replaced, actually? The helicopter, is that right? Although, is it turning up in other bills, perhaps? Where do you stand?
Well, I didn't do it, but we all did and vote on it, but it ended up towards the end of the session. One of the measures that was changed had to do with a legal opinion from Attorney General. So that we needed to do. Last year, I passed a bill with regards to rental cars. And with the increase on the rental car portion from $3 to $2, I was kind to Kama'ainas that the increase would not affect Kama'ainas if they have a driver's license, a Hawaii driver's license. So it would be borne to a visitor. And it sailed. The House passed, the governor signed as well, until we found out that it's unconstitutional. And so there was a commerce, it has to do with commerce. And so we had to, the money committees had to go find a bill, and that took care of one of my bills.
Are you comfortable with that process, though? Do you, the general opinion, the majority opinion is that this is a necessary tool that late in the session or even early in the session, sometimes we have to make changes and introduce bills.
If there's time, and if it has to do with constitutionality,
and thus
that
far
must
the
be
court
done.
is on your side.
And the emergencies that we did in 2006, how we're going to pay for the earthquake damages in the state. We did that with a gut and replace bill because we had to meet the state's funds to meet federal contributions.
Okay.
We had to do that. But other than that, there are times we have time during session. I've never used gut and replace. I think Chris has, but on some measures. However, if it's important, that has to do with an attorney general's opinion, whatever. But we do have time. We got at least 2 months to make sure that we have all our bills in place.
Okay, Chris, have you ever gutted and replaced?
I have.
What was it like?
Well, Chad. No, I think one of the bill. I think the bill that Lorraine's referring to was a bill between us in conference a few years ago. I ended up winning the Rusty Scalpel Award for doing it, but
the Big Island Press Club, is that what you're referring to? Yeah. Isn't them? Aren't they?
No.
That's the League of Women Voters and Common Cause.
Yes.
My bad. Sorry about that.
Yes. No, but the circumstances
the
surrounding
lava
that,
tube.
I think, really illustrate, I think, the challenge that we face with the timetable here and the way that the Constitution sets up our process. Because what we had were 2 bills that had public hearings the whole way on largely similar subject matter, 3 readings in the House, 3 readings in the Senate, everybody's weighing in. At the end of the day, we had these 2 bills sitting in conference that were kind of a mishmash of all of that. And so to make it clean and to afford votes for both our chambers, we put the stuff that is most closely tied together in one bill and the other stuff in the other bill, all having had public scrutiny the whole way. The bill numbers changed. And so that happens. I think to the point that Senator Inouye raises about, sometimes at the end of session you're stuck. The truth is that most of our budget bills are gut and replace bills. But the question is not, I think there's too much focus on gut and replace, like it's a secretive process. I mean, I've been here for 11 years, and there are certainly bills that I think have been not on the merits, that have been, just pushed through at the last minute from time to time. And I have significant issue with that and the use of that kind of tool in that process. But the use of the tool itself and the reason it exists is because the Constitution ensures that we are able to do the people's work when it needs to be done.
Okay, I am going to ask this question of Keali'i and Blake as well, but I want to make clear here, a main complaint about gut and replace is the lack of public notice. In the case of the 3 bills in the Senate, four really that were amended, it was less than 24 hours notice for people to then come and to testify. And then when you do this in conference committee, there's no chance for the public to weigh in. Yes, I recognize those bills have moved through previously and there's been commenting on, but you, in some cases, are creating a new entity, a new bill that arguably one should be able to weigh in on if you're the public.
Sure, so to be clear, that's not what I did. As we talk about this.
But wasn't that done in conference committee?
It was done in conference committee, but nothing was new.
Okay.
Everything had gone through the entire process. And so I think, and that's what I was getting at right before you jumped in again, was what we need as we look at this issue is to identify how can we ensure that the public weighs in and their results or their comments are heard and result in legislation that makes sense, that has gone through the proper process. So I think in that case, absolutely, you need flexibility in a system, which our Constitution provides us, to be able to make decisions that are difficult at times, especially when it comes to budget things and other stuff like that. Is there rules that we can put in place to limit the stuff that you're referring to, I think, which is often confused with gut and replace, which is where something comes out of nowhere with no input and suddenly is law? The answer is yes. And the House in particular, and I can't speak to the Senate rules, I'm sure they have something similar, but on the House side, we have rules that specifically say that is out of bounds. We should not do that. And in fact, our rules require that if we're going to put any new amendments on the table that are significantly different than what's in a bill, we have to post 48 hours notice, put that on the website so that everyone can see exactly what those amendments are before a public hearing so that the public has a chance to weigh in.
I was also thinking of when Sylvia Luke came up with a rail budget, a bailout at the end of the session 2 years ago. Of course, we could not make an agreement. We had to go into the special session later, but she came up with a compromise bill that had not been heard on regarding how to fund the rail. But I don't want to go into that too much or put that on you. Keali'i, your thoughts on gut and replace?
Well, I think similar to many other folks out there, the Democratic Party has in fact year after year visited resolutions to oppose gut and replace, and we have consistently not been able to have agreement within the party. And I think part of that gets back to what Rep. Lee is talking about, which is folks have seen where when used transparently, there are benefits at times in such a tight time frame to have certain types of, whether it's emergency or other types of issues addressed. So we have seen many situations where there's been a benefit to that. Chris's point, though, is how, rather than throw the whole thing out, the baby with the bathwater, is what are the issues? What are the specific concerns? And it sounds like possibly the House and others, maybe the Senate, has rules that looks at that transparency. By all means, the Democratic Party is 100% supportive of transparency, people having access to information in a timely way so that they can weigh in. The key there is working with the legislature to see how that happens. The other piece is, even if you aren't able to weigh in at the time that occurs, you ought to be clear about what role your legislator played in any of those activities. Was that a piece of legislation that when the final product came out from that gut and replace, is that what you believe is in the best interest of your community? And then if not, have a conversation with your legislator. My sense is many legislators are very open to, I know I might sound like I work for them, but I have seen that people are very open to getting feedback about what works and what doesn't work. And I think if they hear from enough people about the preferred way of transparency and whatever else there might be, I think that weighs in a whole lot more than just trying to get rid of gut and replace.
Okay. I'm going to change my answer real quick.
Sure.
I'm going to say no, I did not gut and replace as people imagine it to be, because I absolutely have never put new substance in a bill that had never had a public hearing. What we did was switch some stuff around that had already had public hearings, so it made sense and met legal muster. But that being said, I totally accept full responsibility for everything, which is why I answered the question yes in the first place. But I will say, I think that's an important distinction we have to make. And I even had a call from one of the board members of the organizations who gave me that awesome award, apologizing for it after, because once it was explained that this is what actually happened, then it became apparent that that is not exactly what they were targeting.
Okay, Blake, gut and replace.
So I generally support gut and replace. I think it is a tool. And I think the one thing I put out there for context is every single year there's 3,000 bills that get introduced, right? And at the end of the day, maybe 300 pass. which means there's about 90% that die. I mean, the attrition rate for bills is just extremely high, and most bills die. And so if there is a bill that makes it through with cut and replace, it's because there is political will. And I mean, sometimes it may not have happened in the most publicly transparent way, but at the same point, there was the political will for it to pass.
Okay. Why are there so many bills? I mean, I got to read all of them, or at least read the subject matter. Isn't there ever some pruning that goes on ahead? Like, gee, we know that 90% of these are going to die. Or can you just not do that because every lawmaker has the opportunity to introduce what they want?
Well, what's been interesting is the Senate has 25 members, and we normally have a very least number of bills traditionally in the past. This year, for some reason, I think we had more than the House, and the House has 71 members.
Well, 51 members.
I mean, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
not
that's right.
71.
Yeah, 76 total.
In the
Right.
legislature, but 51, and they have more members, so.
All right.
Yeah, no, I'd say, you know what, I think if you actually looked at some of the potential ideas before session, there's actually like 9,000 of them. So there is pruning that goes down to get it to that 3,000, 1,500 number. So life could be a lot better for everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, we just have some very active members in the legislature who wants to introduce many, many bills, even out of their scope of committee.
No names? You're not going to drop any names, Lorraine?
Yeah.
Okay.
And usually like for me, for transportation, that's most important. So I have a lot that has to do with transportation.
Okay. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to make a final remark. Anything that they didn't get to talk about, I do have a couple of closing remarks that I want to make as well.
Just want to touch upon a bill that we didn't get a chance to talk about. There's two right now related to suicide prevention. Especially it appropriates funds for programs for the neighbor islands that do not have programs for teenagers who are suffering from issues that relate to suicide. And I think this is critical. They're a vulnerable population in general, and the fact that they're considering at any point in their young lives about suicide, we definitely as a state need to do a lot more. So I didn't get to talk about that particular bill, but that one's near and dear to my heart. So I hope folks take a look at that as well. And again, I hope if anything anyone got out of this is really the only way, as was spoken about today, the only way good legislation gets passed is if people get involved. It's one of the reasons I actually did run for chair of the Democratic Party, because I do believe people can, through their efforts, if they really get engaged, can make a difference. And that's not going to happen. This square building is going to be here. Legislators are going to continue to pass bills, and they're going to need to hear from you. If they don't hear from the constituents, they're going to do what they believe is best based on the limited information they might have. The best information they can have to pass good legislation comes from constituents.
Thank you, Keali'i. Blake.
I just want to thank Civil Beat and the audience for the opportunity. You know, when I go home every night after session, my other half of me, oh, how was it today? Did you pass any bills? And I keep having to explain, well, it doesn't work that way. I mean, it's one of these things, like, unless you're actually here and unless you do it, people just don't get it, right? And so it's nice to talk with a bunch of folks that get it, that are in the same space. And I applaud people for having passion and dedication to whatever issue you have, because I really do believe the legislature is the best place for public discourse, and not everybody's going to agree. Of course they're not going to agree, but this is a place where an issue can get aired, and hopefully with media attention, with public participation, it starts informing people so that we can really start moving things forward in whatever way.
Okay.
So I appreciate
Lorraine,
it.
I see you got some bills highlighted
Oh, yes.
there.
Well, I'll speak on behalf of the Transportation Committee, and as we know, we've had many fatalities on our highways. And so we have a measure, which is Senate Bill 663, right next door to my airport bill number. And it establishes the red light cameras. And we need to do something. And Blake and I dealt with this issue back in the early 2000s when we had the red light cameras debate. But it's about time. We need to do that. We're working with the counties. It's going to be a county and state program, and the counties will implement it. They'll decide which intersections are most vulnerable. So it's not like you're going to see every intersection will have a red light, but we need to do that. We also have had bills with regards to crosswalks, and so the timing of when you should get into the crosswalks. Also that improvements to what we're going to do with our getting some monies into our highway funds. I'm very concerned with that because we know the legislature has not increased the gas tax for quite some time. We're not going to get support this year. And so the depletion in our highway fund is like poop. And with all of the hazards that's been happening, I'm very concerned because we won't be able to, in the future, to match our federal dollars. I'm very concerned of that. So I have a bill to charge the EV cars of $15 on registration, which has been debated in the Senate. It's going over to the House. But I believe the EVs, though as light as they are, they should pay their fair share because they also use the roads.
Okay. Chris,
Thank you.
finally, to you.
Yeah, I just highlighted a couple last issues that we hadn't talked about. One is civil asset forfeiture.
Oh, yeah.
There have been a lot of complaints over people being arrested, having their property taken, and then never charged with a crime, never
This is something the
convicted.
Supreme Court just ruled on.
That's right. So expect that to be a big thing going forward. Criminal justice reform. You know, we've had a number of years of lead up to this, looking at how we can better effectuate justice without unnecessarily incarcerating people or costing them money. And then finally, I think the biggest thing this year, which I'll return to, which we started from, is that I think this is going to be the biggest year in a long, long time for improving our overall political and electoral process, for enshrining, I think, people's interest and ability to change things democratically in a way that we're not seeing anywhere else in the country. Elections reform, campaign spending, your ability to come into the legislature, have your voice heard and make a difference. I think we're going to see a lot of that this year. And it's a testament, I think, to everyone who's come out and also, I think, to the politics of Washington that show us that we can be better. So let's do it.
Chris Lee, Lorraine Inouye, Blake Oshiro, and Keali'i Lopez. A round of applause for our guest. By a show of hands, how many of you are donors to Civil B? Please raise your hands.